Oh, it's really lovely to see you all and a really warm welcome to our session today. Um, I think we are so fortunate actually to have Rhonda in this session. Rhonda is a professor of law, also has a background in sociology, and is a teacher of MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and has worked very closely with John Kabat-Zinn. And for me, there's just a sense, well, I've been reading Rhonda's work, of course, in a lot of detail, but just when different elements of someone's life and training and personal and professional interests come together and create something really helpful and supportive, it's just, yeah, it's a great offering. And I think we're really fortunate to have Rhonda here today. So I'm really excited, Rhonda. It's really nice to see you. Yeah, and this is the book anyway we'll be referring to.
Thank you,
Um,
my dear Jake. It's just to say it's a pleasure to be with you again. We've had these lovely pre-meeting
yeah,
conversations and I'm looking forward to continuing where we've left off. Thank you so
fantastic.
much.
Yeah, wonderful. Good. And yeah, I'm mindful that the first part of Rhonda's book is actually called Grounding. And so, a little bit inspired by that, we're going to actually begin with some grounding, and I'm going to guide us through a meditation. It'll be a fairly short meditation, perhaps 5 minutes or so, maybe a little longer, to support us in arriving and preparing to explore this theme. So, yeah, talking to experienced meditators, I can see people already finding their posture, but as we always do, finding a posture with that combination of alertness and ease. And so, as we begin today, taking a moment to pause, to be still, noticing how things are for you as we arrive at this meeting today. Maybe at the moment things feel smooth and easy, or maybe you're arriving feeling more stirred up. Perhaps also noticing the different thoughts that may already be here around this theme and how it's feeling to arrive in this space. So, noticing what's here, and as much as feels possible, giving space to the thoughts and feelings, allowing things just to be as they are in this moment. And to support this, grounding the attention in the body, allowing the attention to move down into the legs and down into the feet, feeling, sensing the ground beneath you, the contact with the earth. How does that feel right now in the midst of what's here? Body on the ground, connected with the earth. And also the sense of really taking your seat here and now, aware of that contact point, the body and the chair and the cushion, really sensing that physical contact. This kind of mindfulness of body can support a steadiness in the middle of all that comes and goes. Now, if you wish, simply staying with one of these contact points, ground or seat, or if it feels supportive for you, feeling the rhythm of the breath in the body, the in breath and out breath. Coming home to the body, coming home to the breath as we settle and arrive. Thank you. Good. Thank you, everybody. And just to let you know a little more about the format for today. So, roughly speaking, for the next half an hour or so, the plan is for Rhonda and I to have a conversation. And I may start off by asking her some questions, but I imagine she might return the favor. So we'll explore some themes. And then Rhonda will be guiding a practice, a short practice for us. And then after the practice, we'll have an opportunity for some questions and responses from you before a concluding practice. So that's the plan. So yeah, so the first part is me talking to Rhonda. And the first thing I wanted to say, Rhonda, I guess, is that when I was reading your book, time and time again, there's this logic of both and that comes across. You know, very often you're thinking in many different ways and bringing together things that may seem different. And perhaps as a starting point, there's the sense that uh, race is a social construct, and yet at the same time, it affects all of our lives deeply. And race is a fiction, I think you say, and yet we see it everywhere. So I wonder if you could say a little more about that to start with.
Well, thank you so much. Well, I think that that these ideas that come together in my work, um, in a certain sense, I'm mindful of the fact that I'm speaking to an audience of folks who've joined us, um, hosted by a meditation and retreat center, right? And I'm leaning into that because I speak to different types of audiences, but to the degree we are either, sort of experienced practitioners of meditation, to the degree we practice Buddhism in particular, the idea of things not being what they seem to be, maybe something that we understand or at least have some way of kind of opening up the aperture on. So it's important, I think, for us to kind of recognize that for this audience, again, we may have some in this particular space who are new to the practices of Buddhism, of mindfulness. But to the degree that we have folks, and maybe if we could just do a quick show of hands, if you're willing, those who have your visuals on, how many of you have a meditation practice, a regular practice? Okay, so yeah, most of us, and maybe there's some here who are just starting out. But to whatever degree, and there is no, this isn't a test, right? This is wherever we are on that journey, here we are. Let's just honor it. But when we talk about both and ways of seeing things, and talk about how it is that something that can seem so real can also be an illusion, there is one way we can talk about that, irrespective of meditation, irrespective of Buddhism, in a secular sense. And I think we can have a richer understanding of that, at least as in my own experience. I've been able to more richly kind of live into the reality of this sort of both and of this things not being what they seem and trying to come to some way of being and wise relationship with that. I feel like my own practices of mindfulness meditation and Buddhism, the principles and practices, support me in that in a way that I hadn't been supported when just trained as an academician, when simply trained as a sociologist, right? When just, kind of imbibing conventional wisdom about these things, which are often about something is either this or that, right? So to the degree that I think, the underlying teachings of the Buddha and the kind of insights that arise from practice around, radical impermanence, around radical interdependence and interconnectedness, around the sort of if you will emptiness or interbeing nature of all things. However we see some of the core insights of our practices, I think they, to me, are very helpful in understanding this idea that race, for example, both exists and kind of doesn't exist. So there's that. There's also, I think, for me, an invitation for each of us to, to be willing to explore how language itself, all language is full of all kinds of constructs. And our cultures are just, we've inherited all of these constructs just to move through the world, including, that today is Monday somewhere and maybe Tuesday somewhere else. But right. And so we have all kinds of constructs that we work with. And race is, in a certain sense, just one. And yet sometimes our notions and constructs can seem, more fixed and real, right? We have a construct for a chair and we can sit on it and we don't have to debate, is this a chair or not? Race is a little more slippery. It has different ways of being defined, manifest, depending on our culture, our geography, where we are, and where we are, geographically, but also over time, the idea of race has shifted. And that is what we mean when we say it's a social, maybe legal, political, economic, right? It's a construct. It's something we're constructing culturally, and it's being constructed around us. And we've, of course, been, all of us who are alive today, were born in a world in which this idea of race was already pre-existing, right? So wherever we were, we may or may not have been in a culture, in a place where it mattered a lot. But it's something that if you're alive and an adult today, you've imbibed some training and teachings around. You've come to understand it in some way. We've not come to understand it in the same ways necessarily. And therein lies some of the challenge. And so for me, one of the gifts of our practices is that it helps us open up the aperture on the challenges that we all face moving through the world in these bodies. And in, sort of in relationship to conventional ways of thinking, which often are more about binary, it's something is this or that, which often do invite us to get sort of stuck and seized around identities, and it's fixed and it's permanent. So, but from the perspective of practice and Buddhist practice and principles, there's a different invitation. It's like an invitation to sort of see that which is kind of real and present and relevant and having an impact on our experience of this moment, but also to whatever degree we can to notice the ways we might be getting stuck, right? Seizing, craving, we want it to stay like this, we want to understand it this way. Notice the ways we're pushing away, aversion, right? That dynamic. Notice the ways we're staying kind of ignorant or confused in a fog of not knowing, right? So those basic core teachings of the Buddha about how we can suffer or find our ways unsatisfied and contributing to the suffering of others, right, come into play as well when we think about how we can relate with, yes, race is real on the one hand. I am this black racialized woman in the context of the United States, and so it's real in certain ways in the United States. When I have traveled to South Africa, for example, people have said to me things like, well, we know that there are people in the United States who think they're black who are not, like, because my coloration signals a little bit differently in South Africa. More this, they have this feature of colored, right? And then black is something different maybe. So again, the exact ways that we define these things, it does vary depending on where we are and over time in certain places. But I think, nevertheless, the invitation in this conversation is for us to just see what comes up for us when we are invited to turn toward some aspect of that as it is being presented for us to look at, to know better, to work with in our own experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rhonda. Gosh. And if we're working with this both and logic as you describe, it seems to me that at times at least, some people in meditation circles have maybe gone too quickly towards not just race is not real end of the spectrum, but identity is not real. So you get this thing, don't you, the kind of premature transcendence, and we're beyond race or beyond
Yeah.
identity and beyond this and beyond that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you've got a very clear argument against that in your book, haven't you? And you describe this move from what's called a colorblind approach to this color insight approach. And for me, that was really powerful to be reading about that more.
Yeah. Thank you for naming that. And by the way, the book, of course, that we're talking about is this one. And
Yeah, we've both
people
got our
tease me.
copies.
Yeah, people tease me. They see all the tabbings. They're like, "Whoa, perhaps I should
Mine,
be really working with this a little bit."
mine is not as well read as yours.
It's a little bit more tab. But yeah, so I do. I write about this idea. I have been teaching and reflecting about all these things for a very long time, and at some point while meditating, the term color insight came up for me. And I think it was, probably just, again, a way that our practices bubble things up in our consciousness and make conscious for us things that are, becoming integrated be at the level below consciousness before we are aware. And there was some way that I had been, working with students, lawyers, other professionals to kind of unpack some of the, let's say, the unintended negative consequences of color blindness. Color blindness, again, it's an idea that has this long and very interesting history, actually. We don't have time to fully unpack, but suffice to say, has kind of, I think it lives in our contemporary culture as a sort of, on a one hand, like let's say the positive way that we tend to see it is, it's that positive progressive aspiration to be with each other in ways that manifest that we are not racist, and we don't see each other through the lens of race, or color, right? In other words, color blindness is offered as a kind of an aspiration for living in a way that is, let's say, kind of, manifesting these high ideals of equality, egalitarianism that I think a lot of us are drawn to. If we're drawn to these conversations, if we care about making the world a better place at all. And so I think, therefore, it can be a little challenging for those who, especially, I will say, white racialized people, or people who, for whatever variety of reasons, whatever your coloration and background, have not experienced personally very much of the sort of this color-based, race-based discrimination that is out there. It can be very easy, if you have not personally experienced much of it, or been adjacent to people who experienced much of it, to really sort of see the positives of this colorblind ideal and not recognize some of the downsides, which include the way that a sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for? A certain kind of seizing, holding, attachment, craving for colorblindness. Right? Back to that basic principle practice in all of this. Can kind of end up being a barrier to actually dealing with race and racism when it's showing up. Does that make some sense? Like, if we just want things to be colorblind. Then when someone says, well, it seems like perhaps we need to attend to this or that racial dynamic, the response can be, oh, but why are you bringing up race? I thought that we were all colorblind here. And in the United States, we've used the phrase bypassing. John Wellwood is a psychologist, a sort of spiritual psychologist based here in the Bay Area. Not far from here is where he had been practicing. He's no longer with us. But he had used the phrase spiritual bypassing to describe how people who would become spiritual practitioners would sometimes bypass the psychological work they needed to do, right? The harmful interpersonal dynamics they may be bringing into a relationship. Well, I'm a spiritual person. How could I actually be also abusing or not, silencing my partner, etc.? So John Wellwood came up with this idea of spiritual bypassing to say, no, we actually have some work to do, even if we're spiritual. We still may have psychological or other work to do. And so social justice advocates picked up on that term and saw that it had an analog when it came to the dynamic that can happen, where it's like, when the question is put, when the invitation is put to examine how race and racism, how bias might be showing up, when the response is, no, but I'm spiritual and therefore I only see oneness. It seems a lot like that kind of bypassing of needed psychological dynamics that John Wellwood was talking about. So this kind of bypassing dynamic is a concern that can travel with a kind of hyper-attachment or over-attachment to, colorblindness as an ideal. So, so I see the tension and the difficulty, because I think that in a certain sense, if we think about the ideal world we want to live in, we do hope to minimize the extent to which the things that we are doing and saying and the projects that we take up, the way we identify ourselves, we do want to, I think, I'll just speak for myself, I would like to live in a world in which we are relying less on race as a primary or in any kind of fixed notion of identity, frankly. I personally would like to see us rely a little less on these fixed notions, well, or at least to sort of be aware of the reality that, again, they're not the whole story. They're never the whole story. Again, to infuse whatever identities we have with the porousness or the view that can come from deep practice, which says it's real and seemingly persistent, but also changing and disappearing at the same time. It's really not what you think it is. It enters with everything, right? And that's a mouthful, and it's very unconventional in terms of how we think of things. But I think for me, color insight invites that way of being with race and racism and other actually types of identity, which intersect, of course, with what we call race and colorism, so that we have the insight that comes from practice, the view. It is not fixed. It may be real and appearing in this moment and impacting us in ways that we can feel, name, see, seek to correct. But it is not the whole story. It's not. It doesn't have. It is not permanent. Nothing is permanent. And how we are in relationship to this can help manifest a different world. But we won't get there if we can't be real about what actually is here.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Rhonda. Um, I'm wondering if it might be helpful if I share a personal example. Is that all
Yes.
right? We'll
Oh
try.
my gosh,
Well,
Jake, please share
we'll
a
try.
personal example.
Well, basically, just in terms of this, yeah, color insight, color blindness thing that you're talking about. I mean, I went to a social event quite recently, over the summer, and most people at this event were either from a white background, or my assumption was that was it, or from a Indian heritage. And there was one black person there, and when I saw him, I was aware of that. Now, my sense is, from what you're saying, I mean, I'm interested to check it out with you,
Yeah.
really, but the color blindness approach might have the sort of naivety that somehow I shouldn't have had that thought, I shouldn't have noticed that, oh, it's just another person. But the color insight approach is saying, oh, that's interesting, isn't it? There's this person here, and how is he feeling he fits in with all these other people, and how
Yeah.
I am in relation to him. And all of that happened before I then spoke to him. And so, of course, my sense of his uniqueness as an individual was kind of developed subsequently as I got into a deep conversation.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I love that example. All of it, like even the point that you, as you're unpacking this, is the way that you notice this,
Yeah.
and the way you notice that you noticed it,
Yeah.
and thinking about, well, should I not notice it? But actually, I do notice it, and how might this be
Right.
something that I can, you know, um, sort of, sort of be in wise relationship with,
Yeah.
be in a wiser relationship with. Yeah, thank you. And there's a handbook of mindfulness teaching that I wrote a chapter for, and in that chat, it's called, teaching mindfulness with mindfulness of diversity.
Mhm.
And in that chapter, I have a similar experience that comes from being at a retreat, myself being on a retreat in Switzerland, actually. It was a John Kabat-Zinn, Saki Santorelli 7 day mindfulness immersion, something or other. And at that retreat, I was one of the only black women, maybe the only, who can't come from the United States. Here I am in Switzerland, obviously a fangirl of John and Saki. Um, but I remember having a European young man come up to me and say to me, you know, I notice, you're here. It's good to meet you. I notice you are one of the only black women here. And we actually had a conversation about that. And I wrote about that as an example of, one in which I had my own set of, feelings about, yeah, yes, he is noticing. It could be a little awkward, but at the end of the day, I'm grateful And I wrote about this. There was a way in which I felt some gratitude that despite the riskiness, if you will, a little bit of vulnerability for us to name, which is like there that we often don't name, there was something about that bridging toward me that made me feel a little less alone. And the fact that he seemed to be willing to take a risk, to be a little awkward and vulnerable in service of wanting to connect with me, that felt kind of trustworthy and really, I felt was welcome. I do think it can be a little bit of a risk. We never know how somebody's going to receive this, right? And that I think the way that often socially we are risk averse, and we really just want to sometimes keep a little bit of a mask of we're just gonna like do the bare minimum to stand out in any kind of a way. We just want to, we don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. We want to get it wrong. We don't want to be awkward. There's so many different ways that we, don't wouldn't necessarily lean into this. But I think it's important that we have places and spaces where we can talk about, as we are doing now, all of the kind of different options and choices that we have in terms of how we present ourselves and how we meet each other, and some of the obvious and non-obvious ways that taking some risks can actually enrich our ability to connect, to build communities that feel safer, actually, and have more of a robust capacity to, really manifest inclusion and being more of a refuge for different types of people as they come into spaces where, any of us can look around and see, oh, these people are in the minority in a certain sense in this space. How can we meet this particular individual in a way that helps make that status less of a barrier to feeling a sense of belonging?
Thank you. My sense is here that we're just adding so many different layers to what we mean to be aware. Actually, sometimes I've often thought this. Sometimes when we're aware on a retreat, we're very aware of the sensations in our body, sensations in the left knee, or maybe we're aware of the taste of a raisin or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But actually, this is a huge part of awareness. Who's here? Who's not here?
Exactly. It's
Um,
the inner to extra inner
yeah.
awareness to external awareness. I think of it actually a huge part, and therefore, of course, it seems to me I always felt, of course, we might bring our mindfulness practices more richly into engagement with this aspect of our experience, but because again, you know, we're differently vulnerable socially. We know this. Um, it's kind of understandable to me. There are many things we could unpack about why it hasn't become or wasn't always thought of as like the thing that we're going to bring our mindfulness to. Um, I mean, I think it's a little bit of an indication of the extent to which, again, these things still matter. That it's still it can be so fraught to even try to figure out how to be in a better, wiser relationship with it. In the United States, we've had a real backlash against efforts to look at history more clearly, reckon with our history a bit more, consider how we do justice and equity in the 21st century in light of, for example, the evidence of ongoing police brutality disproportionately affecting brown and black people here, and the rhetoric around immigration that has a kind of a racial, if not racist, sort of tinge to it, to the degree we've been talking about building a wall at one border but not at another border, and what are some of the obvious coloration differences, one border, southern border versus northern border. In fact, in the US, when we talk about build the wall at the border, it's already such a racialized discourse that we know we're talking about the southern border, and we know we're talking about certain kinds of colored immigrants, right? Certain, the coloration of certain immigrants that we want to wall out. We're not concerned about walling out Canadians. Why not? So there is so it's race, but also culture, race and culture intertwine. when we talk about race, we need to open up to a lot more nuance because, again, it means different things. I know, Jake, you had mentioned a little bit of an inquiry around how do we have these conversations when the terms mean such different things. Whiteness means one thing to one people, means other things to other people. And this to me is, yes, part of the challenge, part of, again, what I was alluding to when I said, when we come into human conversations, actually, we're always challenged by words, aren't we? It's, for example, we use the word love. We all know that means 10,000 different things. And we kind of heartfully open up to like that. There's research in the United States, for example, just as an aside, about the difficulty having conversations about different topics. And the researchers looked at college students, young men in a university setting, and they said, let's look at how they differently arrange seats in a room. If we tell them we're going to talk about experiences dating amongst their male peers, same group of guys, different backgrounds, different races, all engaged. And the first question, arrange the set of seats because we're going to talk about your experiences in dating. Oh my gosh, the seats are all close. They're in a circle. Everybody wants to be in, really wants to be in on this conversation. They all got stories to share. They're all from different backgrounds, but they feel like this is something they want to talk about. Dating, right? It's a word that can mean lots of things. We're going to navigate the challenges and get into the conversation. Same group, you ask them to talk about race, racism, diversity. Even the chairs are spaced out differently. So thinking about that, what that suggests, like just the forecasting of the challenge, the structure of the seats in a way that may make it harder to connect, to see each other, to lean in. So that's just one example of how it is that, we carry in our bones deep trainings around what's safe and what's not to talk about in a given place. And because, again, whether we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs or Scott Kaufman is a psychologist who's been updating the hierarchy of needs that Maslow put out. But the bottom line is we all have a deep need for some kind of security. And it is it to the degree that we all in our bones know how risky it is to do the things we're talking about. That's an indication that some people are actually quite vulnerable under the current status quo. The things that we are not allowed together to talk about are probably helping maintain structures of oppression somehow, because in the space of the things we're not talking about, that's where, certain people continue to be disproportionately more vulnerable than others. We've seen this happen during coronavirus. We see it when we talk about immigration again. We can see it when we talk about a lot of the sort of climate injustice issues, who's vulnerable, who isn't. So injustice around race and colorism, it's still there. The legacies of colonialism, it's there. And so the question is, how can we address it? And how can we, in these practice communities, who are developing more, ideally, the skillfulness to deal with multiple complex reality and to deal with the emotional indicators of threat perception and to more skillfully navigate those indicators without seizing into fear and reacting from fear, which any soft-bellied, carbon-based being may do in a time where there's something to be afraid of.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, it's like our practices are kind of a deep infrastructure for doing this work, but the fact that we, even in these communities, struggle is something worthy of our reflection on, isn't it?
Definitely. Thank you so much, Rhonda. Yes, and you're reminding me, just as you say, that very beautiful passage in your book about, is it Shalette and James and their different experiences as they come together in the group to talk about that. Yeah.
Right. That's like James, a white racialized individual who's like, I think I might need to sit by the back door because usually when I get into these conversations, at some point somebody's going to blame me for something. And Shalette's like, hallelujah, somebody's finally wanting to talk about race, coming up to the front of the room, ready to go. So this is, again, right, this type of dynamic, that elephant in the room. How can we use these beautiful, rich, robust practices to help us? We need this because, to the degree we are concerned about, you know, let's say in the social justice conversations I'm in, we often use the phrase surplus suffering because we know that as human beings we will suffer, right? The Buddha's a famous insight: old age, illness, and death, and the empathy that comes with knowing that all of us suffer in those ways. Wow, we could have a whole, years long, lifelong conversation about the ways that we are all equally, in a certain sense, vulnerable as soft-based, carbon-based beings, so, soft-bellied, right? We're all, and especially right now, we're aware with the public health threats, coronavirus, etc. We know how vulnerable, we all are, just at the risk, in the point of trying to stay alive. And you add climate injustice and climate change. We've got more hurricanes, we've got more, all of the things, and we've got polarization, we've got war right now. So for many of us, it's like, okay, all human beings suffer. Do we really need to talk about race, right? I mean, why? And that's a moral and ethical call for us to think about. It's like, yes, we're all suffering, and some of us might be disproportionately suffering because of the ongoing, dynamics of othering and maldistribution of the resources for thriving that have flowed from racial hierarchies of material acquisition for some, deprivation for others, right? So that some people have the extra money in the bank if there's a climate disaster so they can go take shelter. Some people don't, and disproportionately who has those resources. And again, if we care, and who doesn't, if we really care about this kind of the suffering in the world, we may at least be open to thinking well about how our own actions, whether we believe in karma or not, just recognizing that actions and actions may matter, right? This is about really inviting us into our own way of asking, how do we want to live in relationship to being able to see all of these inequities more clearly? How do I, as a human being, in this limited time I have on this earth, where, it's all kind of just a play anyway, maybe, but my actions may matter. My actions may be making it harder for somebody. I don't want to do that. And so it really is, to me, about a kind of ethical call that we each may answer in different ways, because none of us can change these systems and structures. They are bigger than we are. We're born into them. We will shuffle off the mortal coil away from them. The structures will continue. But what can we do in the time that we have, where we are? These are the questions that animate my work personally, the work I do with law students and activists, and this moment that I'm having with you.
Thank you. We can really feel that animation, Rhonda. Yeah, it's so good to hear from you. And I'm wondering if it might be a good time to maybe share some of the practices from your book, and then we can have some questions from people.
Of course, thank you so much. Well, again, where do we begin? There is a lot in this book. If you have, again, some of you I know may have done me the honor of already purchasing it. Some of you may be struggling to get through it. I did the audiobook as well because of the extent to which I guide practices. I find it so much easier sometimes, rather than reading a meditation and trying to put it down or read and practice, to just listen. And I myself read for 8 days straight to offer guidance as a support. But why don't we take one of the practices? I often, when in these sessions that I engage with folks, when I'm just sort of overviewing the work, I'll read just the poem at the beginning called "If the Path Could Speak," which is a reminder of our invitation to ground in our bodies, to remember that we are part and parcel of this earth, the air that we breathe, right? We are of the wind, the rain, the fire. And so we inherently belong. So I just touch on that in these moments as a kind of a preliminary to this. It reminds me of the practice, the beautiful practice that Jake offered at the beginning. I could listen to Jake's practice all day. And I was noticing the delight I had in just like the voice, I mean, that the gratitude for having the capacity to hear and the kind of, the way that we as human beings, we're so blessed in so many ways with, right, with such like a sensory smorgasbord, right, through which we might just delight in being alive. And so this first poem is meant to help us remember that, because oppression, one of the things it does is it disconnects us from the joy of being alive. And so that this opening poem is about that. Beneath these words rests the awareness of generations and of generations and of the generations that have come before. The awareness that each one of us is a vital part of the earth that we call home, is of the wind, the rain, the fire, and so inherently belongs. If the path could speak, it would say, we must assert that which already exists within us, deep within us, namely a sense of kinship with all those with whom we share the earth. We must assert a sense of kinship with all those with whom we share the earth. The path would insist this, our work, our practices inspire this. On repeat in every language, unceasingly. So I see that as like, remember this, just remember. And in a certain sense, mindfulness practice to me is just all about that, full stop. Just remember, don't forget. It's so easy to forget that we're radically interconnected, that we're gifted with these moments of being alive together, which every moment is a new moment. We kind of protect ourselves by trying to predict based on the past what's going to happen in the future. But the invitation of these practices is to open up to the unknown, to the mystery of life, and the possibility and potential that comes with that. So I want to, if I may, then add a little bit more. On pages 28 and 29 of the book, early on still, I have a practice called a pause for human kindness. And the invitation is for us to reflect on a moment of discomfort we've had where the issue of race may have been pointed out to us, may have been raised. So really just recall, maybe it's an experience you had where you've felt, marginalized based on your identity, or you've witnessed someone be marginalized, or someone has challenged you around inclusion. So really just whatever's coming up, please pick something that is accessible now, maybe not the most painful memory, because we're just going to work a little bit here with an impression that that may be coming up that reminds us that we do know something from our own experience about how these matters can show up. So a moment of some sort of race-related tension or discomfort or pain. And from this place, I've already placed one hand over the heart, because this is a kind of compassion practice. And it's an invitation to recognize that whatever our background, we may know something about the suffering associated with these things. It may have been in our ancestors' experience that we're thinking of. Or again, it may be some member of our work or other community, and it may have happened just today. So the invitation is to, from this place, bringing the intentionality around meeting our suffering with kindness, breathing in and breathing out, opening up, noticing what is here. So when you recall this moment, right here, right now, notice where you are feeling this in your body. Is it just in the mind's eye that you're seeing this almost like a play and you're struggling to really feel it? Or is there strong emotion coming up? And if so, can we put a name to the emotion? Is there sensation coming up where we are feeling tense, maybe wanting to yawn, maybe cough, maybe just feeling uncomfortable coming up? So notice feeling some discomfort coming up. Notice the sensations in your body that make the sense of discomfort knowable to you. And again, consider placing one or both hands either in the heart region, or maybe it might be more comfortable to place it in that place in the body where you feel this image or discomfort coming up. Just pause and see where your body might be inviting. And again, the neurobiologists tell us that the touch of our own hands is healing. Just as when we place our hand in the hand of a loved one or on the back of a friend when they need support, we can support ourselves in these difficult moments as well, yes. Just lovingly, if you're willing, just allowing yourself the sense of kind support. And if you're willing, inwardly recite the following phrases. This image, this memory, this reflection is calling up a moment of racial or race-related discomfort, or whatever words are that are best for you. It's calling forth a moment of racism that I experienced. It's calling forth a moment of bias that was pointed out to me. Again, use the words that are resonating for you. Inwardly recite, yes, this is what that was. This is how it's feeling in my body now. And now if you'll inwardly recite, such moments are not uncommon in a world in which race matters. This is an invitation to sort of reflect on the fact that you're not alone in having experienced this type of difficulty. And again, you may find other words that better capture this for you. But I'll say again what I'm suggesting as a kind of a opening invitation. Such moments are not uncommon, indeed may be common depending on where we are in a world in which race matters. Bias happens. People are impacted by these. I am not the first. This person may not be the first. They probably won't be the last. So there may be ways you may just remind yourself that we live in a world where this is a feature of our experience. And now if you'll inwardly open up to the sense that in these moments of difficulty, each of us deserves a kind way of holding the challenge. This is not to say that we're going to just sort of rest forever in this cushion of this bubble of kindness, but it does invite us into compassionate holding of our experience, whatever our background, whatever the degree of pain, whatever the sense that somebody else is suffering more. Can we open up to a compassionate holding of our experience? And inwardly offer kindness to yourself, but also, if you're willing to repeat, and I offer kindness to others who were impacted by these painful realities as well. I offer my support. I offer my care. I offer my willingness to attend to the harm caused by these dynamics. So now as we begin to bring this meditation to a close, there's a little bit more that I do in the book around this. I actually invite kind of really just allowing ourselves to sit for a few moments in different ways that I describe in the book, deep in the sense of just kind appreciation for the part of us that's willing to look more deeply at this part of our lives to help alleviate the suffering, the part of it that we carry, the part of it, the confusion that we carry, the woundedness that we sometimes carry that can, if not well attended to, be a driver of hidden dynamics of greed, hatred, delusion, um, and other forms of suffering. So just pausing, and as we bring this practice to a close, sensing as best you can what is well within you, what is grounded within you, what feels a sense of connectedness to well-being, to the earth. And if and as you're ready and willing, the invitation is to extend some of the surplus good within you, opening up the heart, opening up the sense of the sun within to radiate outward, to help heal and support those who may be suffering even more around these dynamics than maybe we are in this moment. Or again, just to extend the wish for well-being to those communities, those cultures or subcultures, those individuals that we know are suffering or have suffered disproportionately because of the delusions we can carry about the differential human worth and value, who matters and who doesn't, that travel with these trainings around racialized bodies. Thank you. Thank you so much. I invite you to breathe in the sense of appreciation of the possibility that these practices can help us heal, and then breathe out again the wish for well-being and healing that we extend to all those near and far who are struggling right now to move into a state of greater equilibrium and balance in the face of these sorts of challenges and harms. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, for sharing that practice. Yeah, really beautiful. And should we move now to some questions from people? Is that okay? Yeah.
Thank you, my dear. I really appreciate your question. I think of hope and fear as being two sides of the same coin, actually. So, when we are struggling to feel and access hope, it's partly because maybe inquiry. Are we feeling a little bit more of the fear and the challenge of these times around these issues? And if we are, that's totally understandable. So I think it's really we're being called to deepen our wherewithal, our capacities to navigate, closer to the bone of fear, actually, as a doorway into hope. Um, I think I'm reading one of my friends, and I'm working on a new book project with Bhikkhu Analayo, a teacher some of you may know, based in the U.S. right now at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies in Barry. And one of his books, Introducing Mindfulness, he talks about how the historical Buddha reportedly trained in dealing with fear quite a bit as as part of the practices and the sort of preliminaries, if you will, for kind of deepening, opening up the heart space to being in wiser relationship with all that is. And then that makes sense to me because there's just so much to be afraid of as a human being. And I'm naming this because when I think of the challenges to being hopeful right now, it feels like part of what's happened is, you know, for reasons that may be predictable. This is my sociological lens now, putting that on. If you look at history over time, you see wherever we are in different cultures and different places, there is this tension between a more egalitarian, loving, altruistic way of being together, on the one hand, that some of us are naturally drawn to, and we are, team egalitarian and altruist. But then there are others who are in on another team, and their team, exploitation, hierarchy, power over as opposed to power with. And again, if you look across history, you just see this struggle, and you see in different times and places, different cultures, different political structures, that there are, the altruistic impulses may be on the rise sometime. The culture may be seemingly, right, the international cultures and protect. We may be moving in the direction of what seems more hopeful and positive, especially if we're drawn to altruism and care and connection. But again, history suggests that it's sort of a cycle and that we have to take a stand and we have to work to keep those more egalitarian and hopeful ways of being together, nonviolent ways of being together on the ascendancy or right in the right relationship with the other. But I think so. So that that may or may not be true. That I think again, the sociologist in me believes that or has seen a lot of evidence that suggests a way of seeing this challenge in broad historical sociological terms, and then realizing then it's our choice. How do we want to show up? And for me, it's when I find myself challenged, I sort of figure out what practices I can lean more into. I was telling Jake at the beginning, before we met, I've been really leaning into gratitude practices because notwithstanding the challenges, I personally know, just the fact that I'm alive, the fact that I have the sensory capacities that I have that are not promised to me even another day. On this day, I can be with you, listening, hearing the delight of your voice and seeing your beautiful face, right? Each of you have come together from some place that's pulled you into a hard conversation when you could have been doing something else. To me, that's inspiring hope. That inspires hope. So I wouldn't be here if I didn't feel very drawn, as you are, my dear, to live in a way that helps me remain in contact with hope. But that is a practice. So it's like you have to choose. Like I'm going to practice connecting with sources of hope, renewal, regeneration. And I'm here because I do think these practices that we've been privileged to engage with, whether we call them mindfulness, Buddhism, whatever you call them, they help us wake up to the possibility in every moment to seize and choose ways of being in a kind of hopeful, uplifting relationship with whatever arises. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to make sure if we mindful as possible to sort of see if there is someone who has experienced the challenge through the lens of a racially marginalized body, right? So if we have someone who can speak to, again, maybe being minoritized in a certain circumstance, if we can kind of make sure we're balancing out. Thank you all for supporting me in that intentionality as we gather here. Whew, can we just pausing? Yeah, pausing. I'm just feeling and sensing both what you're sharing, the words that you're sharing, some of what I can sense behind and beneath the words, or the deep emotions that were kind of being touched into by that practice. The difficulty, and I did this sort of gesture of like, this is a gesture, trauma informed, right? Sensitive holding of, right? Reminding I'm safe, I'm
Yeah.
here. This is difficult, but I am here, right? I don't, I am, these are just gentle reminders to come back home to the body as a support when we're feeling the physical distress of some of these painful memories, my dear. Thank you for naming that. And then for naming that something about freedom, oppression on the one hand, it does disconnect us from our sense of being, entitled to breathe freely, entitled to move in the direction of support and love. That is here too. And that we can choose as best we can to open up to that, without guilt or, right, or at least mindful of like judgment that can come up, right? Because sometimes you can feel a little guilty, even survivor's guilt or freedom guilt, whatever it might be. So that whole complex range. Thank you, my dear, for helping us open up to that. There's so much more. I just am appreciating your presence and the generosity of your sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My dear, thank you. So again, thank you for the generosity of this share as well. Giving another example of some of the ways that, being in these bodies that signal so many things to different people. Right? All our bodies are just signaling things all the time. And when we are in a place where our particular hair or skin color or whatever it might be signals something about our difference from others. How we navigate that is its own, again, there's so many dimensions to this, what we're talking about here. I do think that part of my journey into this work, I mean, I talk about it in the book and elsewhere. I was raised in a predominantly black community in the southern part of the United States, at a time where we're starting to integrate, but where communities are pretty segregated. And actually, in the United States, it's still a pretty segregated world. And at the same time, places like universities, workplace, corporations where I've been privileged to have a chance to work, law firms, they're disproportionately white still. Courtrooms, if you are a lawyer walking into a courtroom, as I have done, representing people, they often, will look at me twice like, are you the lawyer? Because the presumption is if I'm there, I'm either being a defendant, right? Somebody else is going to be speaking for me, or so again, we're talking about the fact that we live in a world. And sometimes there is this extra burden on those of us who are entering into those spaces to discern how to be in wise relationship with the reality of our circumstances. And, so this is all to say there's a, whole movement out there around having these affinity group spaces where we can come together with more people of color and actually talk about some of the ways that being amongst, more people who are, who have the affinity of being people of color, and we can talk about what that means, or other women of color or black women. Sometimes having meditation spaces where we're all together invites us to have different kinds of conversations. And I'm one who believes that, let the 10,000 ways of coming together be of support. We don't have to always go to affinity group spaces. We don't have to never go. But we might experiment with what is it like to be in a place where we're all together around one identity, or in a mixed setting, or where I am the only one. And to just deepen our ability to just be with what is coming and going in these different types of spaces that we did not create. that I think is what mindfulness is really preparing us for in terms of the social edges. It's not just about getting ourselves in this sort of cocoon of experience, but it's like, yeah, I'm being in wise relationship to all that is, and then I go out into the world, and whew, isn't a lot. It's gonna be one thing, one place, another set of stuff here. How can I lovingly walk this walk with integrity, ethically, with love, despite what comes up?
Thank you.
Thank you, my dear. And so opening up the aperture, yeah, create that which we need and realize we need different things at different times. We come and we go and not getting stuck. Or, all right, I always need to practice in this type of group again, and just not being judgmental because, I think of the Heart Sutra, form and emptiness, right? Form and emptiness. Emptiness is form. It's just doorways into experience. Don't get stuck, and don't give ourselves a hard time if we feel we need what we need to deepen our practice. Thank you all so much. Thank you for the gift of your presence here today. Because again, when we know the uplift and value of affinity group spaces, where it can feel like a family reunion, then to come into a space that is not, well, let's just say, sometimes I think of it this way. Tell me if this resonates at all, or maybe it doesn't. I think of the work that I do as inviting us into a different like an affinity group around interest and willingness to work on race and racism that may be sometimes disproportionately white racialized, but is open to, right? It is open to whoever is interested in that. And then within that, we can have, or separate from that, we have racial affinity groups or, as was mentioned, gender, sex orientation, other types of affinity groups. But this is an opener. This is an invitation to come together in this sort of cross racial way and try to see how we can open up the space to continue this work across these lines of difference. And this is not easy. I have not, I feel like I'm a work in progress around, sort of discerning. Sometimes I think we need always, if we're ever going to do any of this, to have opportunities for both racial affinity groups within the spaces. So like ideally this would be like a day long, and we could have the people of color who are interested in having a safer space gather, and white racialized folks who are interested gather, and then we could have this conversation across experience, or we could go back and forth. In other words, I do think so much of my own experience, so much of why I'm here comes from having been raised in and adjacent to Black racial spaces. I was, spent most of my life in Hampton, Virginia, which many of us are learning. The 1619 Project, the ship that landed in 1619 landed at Fort Monroe, which is in Hampton, Virginia. And Hampton University is right there, which is an historically Black college. And I spent time on campus at Hampton before going to a predominantly white college. So I have lived in the both and of these experiences and know the value of both, and feel very deeply that if we're going to advance as a humankind, we need both. And so I just thank you all of you, every single one of you, those who have spoken, who haven't, my dear, and others, for helping just create the possibility that we will keep evolving the kinds of spaces that we need to do all the levels of the kinds of work that we need to move our whole humanity as best we can toward Well, the beloved community, frankly, is one phrase that comes up. Thich Nhat Hanh, Martin Luther King, others. We hope to heal going. We hope our children can navigate these waters a little bit better. We want to be the ancestors who helped start to create a better world around all of this. And I think we are, just in the way that we're being here and now together. So thank you, my dear. Thank you. That nuance, that pointing toward different aspects of the spectrum, including white racialized other teachers. Many of us have benefited from like thank you, right? And we so benefit from having all the spectrum presented. Thank you very, very deeply. As I mentioned, I believe we're evolving the spaces that we need. Those of us who are here and this sharing kind of underscores, I feel kind of we've only started to kind of scratch the surface in terms of deepening our ability to do what was mentioning, right? Experience more profoundly and in more nuanced ways the relative and absolute, or the different, right? The two sides of the form and emptiness, if you will. In other words, we're just starting, and so I definitely believe we need spaces for, let's say, white allies, you might say, right? And there are, but we could do more to create spaces where we have an opportunity for those who are white racialized but are in close proximity to people of color every day, right? Or different types of ways that we could, again, in more nuanced fashions, create the spaces for our sharing about the different types of experiences that are teaching us what race and racism looks like when we behave, when we act, when we move into the world in this way versus that way. And many of us have experiences around how we learned something more about these issues when we chose to ally with or become close to someone who looked different from us, someone who was in a different racial category or background. I myself, have had these experiences. I'm sure each of us in different ways. Some of us are raising biracial, multiracial children. We all are finding different ways into these conversations. And so the hard boundaries of people of color or white are clumsy and are not. I'm just going to say we're going to keep evolving. We're going to keep finding ways to deepen the conversations. It's not that they're not useful on a certain level, but the question always is, and what else can we offer, share, experience to deepen our work? And how can these practices illuminate the possibility that, again, keeps opening our hearts and helping us heal and helping us provide more of the capacity for healing for all who suffer? Because the fact is, many of us, most of us, are suffering disproportionately right now. We need to find all the different doorways into helping relieve that suffering, because if it's not well healed or well acknowledged, that that's part of what contributes to its further manifestation in the world, creating more harm, more wars, more violence. So thank you, my dears, all of you. I know we're out of time. I wish always we have more time for these. By the way, for those who are willing, you can always stay in touch with me at rhondavmagee.com. I was actually just in Albuquerque in person for an event a week and a half ago. But I'm doing this year-long engagement, online virtual engagement at the Bari Center for Buddhist Studies, BCBS. So check me out at bcbs.org, I think it is. And I look forward to, I'm part of y'all's network now. You can't get rid of me just because we're about to pop off Zoom.
Oh, Rhonda, it's been such a delight to be with you. Yeah, really, really. Oh gosh. I feel I can see from other people too. Yeah, it just feels, yeah, such a special thing you've offered for us. Is it okay if we bring in James? I think James had a few
Absolutely.
announcements as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Um, First off, thank you so much for both of you for being here today. On behalf of Gaia House, my heart is just so thankful to you both and to you, Rhonda, especially for bringing this into the light and for sharing yourself and your experience with us. And I wish that this conversation could keep going into the wee small hours of tomorrow morning because it's so important. And to all of you here with us tonight, a tradition with Gaia House is to offer Dana for our what we want to offer in generosity to the speakers and those that come to share their knowledge, their wealth of knowledge with us. Speakers don't get any compensation from Gaia House. Any registration fees and that go to the behind the scenes things to keep Gaia House coming to you. So I've put into the chat the information to um, offer up anything that you feel that you can um, in in the traditions of the Buddha and in Pali with Dana, this generosity for what you've experienced this evening as your heart wills you to do so. So thank you very much and thank you for being here.
Thank you. So sometimes we do this thing. I don't know if it's okay with you, Rhonda, if people can just unmute and everybody says goodbye at once. Sometimes that's quite nice. But
I love it.
take care, everybody.
Good
Bye.
night. Thank you for
Thank
everything.
you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good
Thank you
day.
so much.
Shared and spoken.